let me welcome you all to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name's Kent Hughes. I direct a program here on science, technology, America, and the global economy. And before I introduce Linda Killian, who's going to moderate the panel today, let me just say a word or two about the Wilson Center for those of you who are new to us. The center was established in 1968 by the Congress as a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson. So rather than one more monument or one more statue, they wanted something that would capture both sides of Wilson's life. Wilson is the only American president to have had a PhD and was, in fact, quite a prominent political scientist before he became a first governor of New Jersey and then president of the United States for 2 terms. And what we do over the course of a year is try to bring together the best people from the academic and the policy thinking world together with people in Washington and really increasingly around the world who are on the front lines of actually making policy. We're not an advocacy group. We never take an institutional position, but we really try to clarify those choices by bringing together a series of different perspectives. We are, in many ways, still living in the age of Wilson, the United States, and I think most Americans still have a sense of wanting to spread democracy around the world. The Federal Reserve, which you read about every day, was established during Woodrow Wilson's tenure. Women gained the right to vote during his presidency. We also, the income tax was also established. We don't emphasize that quite as often. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce Linda Killian, sitting in the center of this distinguished panel. Linda is not only really the moderator, but really put together this outstanding mix of politicos and journalists and people who've been on the inside and watched the inside develop over time. Linda has quite a distinguished career herself. She is the director of the BU Washington Center that includes the Washington Journalism Center and the Washington Intern Program. She is an active journalist as well. She's a columnist for Politico, which I'm sure a lot of you read regularly, and she has published for quite an array of journals. She's been a correspondent for a number of leading newspapers, and of course my favorite on that list is the Portland Oregonian, since I'm from Oregon originally. She is also the author of a much-praised book, The Freshman, What Happened to the Republican Revolution, and is here at the Wilson Center as a senior scholar working on another book, The Evolution of the Modern Democratic Party. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Ken. We really, really appreciate you being willing to host us, and it's always a joy to work with you. You're just a wonderful person. I can't say enough about that, and I also want to thank Jack.
Don't stop there.
I also want to thank Jacqueline Nader, who helped us here at the Wilson Center, and David Tomasi and everyone at Rasky, Baerlein, Strategic Communications, who also helped put together this panel. So we do have a very exciting and impressive panel, and I know that they're going to have a lot of very interesting things to say. I hope we'll have a little disagreement, and I hope we'll have a lively discussion. To my right is Jeff Zeleny. He is a staff reporter in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. He covered the Obama campaign throughout the primary and general election. He's going to be covering the Obama White House. He's also covered foreign affairs and news out of Iraq for the Times. He was formerly the national political correspondent for the Chicago Tribune and was a member of the Tribune team that won the Pulitzer Prize in explanatory journalism for documenting gridlock in the nation's air traffic system. He's a Nebraska native and started his career in the Des Moines Register. Kevin Merida, at the end of the table, is an associate editor at the Washington Post. He's a former Wilson Center public policy scholar and a very good friend to the Boston University Washington Center. He's a BU alum. He's covered or supervised the coverage of 6 presidential campaigns, including this contest, which he chronicled as a roving feature writer focusing on voters. He's now reporting on the impending Obama presidency and the transformations taking place across the nation. In his long and distinguished journalism career, he's covered the White House, Congress, national and local politics. He's the co-author of the recently released Obama, the Historic Campaign in Photographs, and of supreme discomfort, the divided soul of Clarence Thomas. He was the coordinating editor of the Post's year-long 2006 series, Being a Black Man, which won numerous awards. As I mentioned, he's a graduate of Boston University and a winner of the Distinguished Alumni Award from BU's College of Communication. In 2000, he was named Journalist of the Year by the National Association of Black Journalists, and he also was a Pulitzer Prize finalist in 1990 as part of the Dallas Morning News team reporting on the world's hidden wars. To my left is Larry Rasky, who's chairman of Rasky Baerlein Strategic Communications and was communications director for the Biden for President 08 campaign. He has more than 30 years of experience in public policy and media relations. Last year, he took a leave from his firm to join the Biden for President campaign as its communications director. He's a long history with Senator Biden and previously served as press secretary for his 1988 presidential bid. And we were talking yesterday about the book, What It Takes, which I know some of you have read, and he's featured prominently in that book, about that 1988 campaign. Prior to launching Rasky Baerlein Strategic Communications, he worked as a special assistant for policy and communications for Congressman Ed Markey and served as a communications director for John Kerry's first Senate campaign and was also a deputy press secretary for President Jimmy Carter's reelection campaign in 1980. So he's been with a winner and a loser. Lots of losers. He earned his degree in communications from Emerson College, where he currently serves as vice chairman of the Board of Trustees. And last, but certainly not least, at the other end of the table is Brad Todd, who is a Republican strategist and creator of some RNC ads this year, and a partner of On Message, a Republican media firm. He led the Republican National Committee's $50 million independent expenditure effort this year for advertising related to the presidential campaign. And before that, he was a media strategist for Mitt Romney. He also was involved in several successful GOP congressional races this year. He produced the innovative advertising that helped Bobby Jindal make him history as the youngest governor in Louisiana's history and the first Indian American governor in the nation. From its founding, his firm On Message, prior to founding On Message, he was a partner in the Todd and Castellanos creative group with GOP admin Alex Castellanos. He has also earned national recognition for his advertising on the issue of school choice with national and regional campaigns to create Washington, D.C. school voucher program and preserve Wisconsin's school voucher program. He holds two things I want to mention. He holds a master's degree from the University of Missouri School of Journalism and a bachelor's degree from Rhodes College. So he likes journalists a little more than the average Republican, I think, and likes working with them. And I have to mention that Brad and I have known Brad now for many years. Brad and I met when he was a young pup and came to Washington with Dan Hillary. I was working on my book on the Republican Revolution, and he was working for Van Hillary of Tennessee, who was elected in that class in '94. I know that Brad convinced Van to work with me on the book, and I probably owe the entire book to Brad.
Yeah, you can cut me a check if you want. It's going to be a tough cycle for a Republican operative.
So thanks, Brad. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Let me start with Jeff Zeleny, because you and I were talking yesterday, and you said that you think that we're still learning things about what happened in the campaign. More information is coming out, and we're still learning things about how this organization was built, that even the campaign, which to me seemed very self-confident, didn't know how well they would do in places like North Carolina, Ohio, Indiana. So I wonder if you could sort of talk about that, and also how he built this campaign team and what that tells us about how he might govern.
Sure. Thank you, Linda, and thank you for your attention this morning on what seems to be an early morning for a newspaper man here. But I think we are still learning a lot about the Obama campaign, perhaps a little more so than the McCain campaign. Looked at and studied for some time to come. Certainly all the political factors were going in their favor. The climate was in their favor. But how they won the campaign, I think it's important to not forget the primary phase of this campaign. Exactly a year ago, slightly more than a year ago, everyone in Washington thought that Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton was sure to be the Democratic nominee. The word did not reach the voters of Iowa or the voters of New Hampshire. And while a lot of voters were focusing on, or a lot of people in Washington were focusing on the national polls, et cetera, I think there was a meeting in mid-October in Chicago that hasn't been written about that much. It's been written about some in sort of reconstructions that the Washington Post has done and the New York Times and others have done. But it was a chance for Senator Obama to sort of make his own way in this campaign, or to listen to a lot of contributors and other folks who were urging him to change his strategy and to change his Iowa approach. It was a meeting that I think was on October 15th or so in a downtown office building in Chicago. Senator Obama and I think 9 or 10 of his advisors were in the room, and they were all getting a lot of heat for the fact that he was 30 points down in the national polls, and he wasn't doing very well in the Iowa polls as well. But they decided to stick with the strategy of winning in Iowa and expanding the pool of likely caucus goers. And it's something that they were doing that sort of spoke to their whole strategy across the country, was look for people who had not participated in this primary process before. It sounds pretty obvious, but had they not done that in Iowa, they wouldn't have defeated Senator Clinton there, and the whole rest of the year would have turned out differently. So I think one of the things that's interesting about what they did is harness this energy and the enthusiasm and put it to a valuable use. Throughout the last year, people were saying, well, is this Howard Dean or is this someone else? And Governor Dean's campaign in 2004 was sort of a prelude to this, but it was really entirely different. But what was going on was the campaign sort of masterfully decided how they could harness the energy of volunteers in places like Montana, places like Idaho, Wyoming, even Nebraska, other places. So once they finally won Iowa and lost New Hampshire, and we sort of figured out how that went, was the process after February 5th of having this team in place, all these volunteers in place in states where had never been competitive in the Democratic primary process. That is really where the value of these volunteers came into place. So I think it's of course it was all the ads that, helped them win. It was their decision to not take public financing that helped them win. But going back a year ago, I think it was the decisions that were made both in Iowa and in smaller states around the country that really helped them win. Because if you remember one thing that the Clintons said after the South Carolina primary, and they said, okay, now the small states are over. Millions of people will now be able to have their voice heard, and they thought that really benefited them. In fact, it didn't, because they did not have an organization in Minnesota, in Kansas, in Idaho, et cetera. So those decisions made in the primary made it possible for Senator Obama to win places like Indiana and even North Carolina in the fall. So I think the primary and the general are more linked than we might think. So in this whole story of how he did it, I think the first half is almost more important than his race against John McCain.
Thanks, Jeff. I know Kevin spent a lot of the summer and fall, and actually all this year, talking to voters, traveling the country, seeing what was going on out there. As we understand it, from everything that's been written, the coalition that Obama put together was a bit of a new coalition. Blacks, of course, overwhelmingly he won the Hispanic vote. People under 30, college-educated, urban, suburban. He won in states that had not been won by Democrats in 30 or 40 years in some cases. What do you think about this new coalition that he's put together, and what were you hearing as you traveled the country from voters?
Well, thank you, Leonard, and thanks for the nice introduction. It's good to be back at the Wilson Center which helped me produce one of my books. So I'm indebted to the Wilson Center forever, and I hope I can come back again and do the same. I want to first kind of take off of what Jeff was saying, because I think that feeds into that second question, because what Jeff is saying is really wise observations. I think that, it really comes down to kind of, an underestimation at a lot of levels of Obama, and also them really kind of changing the normal campaign playbook. Which is a very hard thing. Larry can probably speak to that, for a lot of seasoned Democrats to deal with. I mean, I heard many calls from people who were in their own party after the nominations wrapped up, saying, they don't listen to us, and we have these wise ideas, and nobody will pay attention to us. But one of the things that happened with the organizing, which is almost kind of, it's done in broad daylight, but in a sense it's done in a stealthy way in the campaign context, is that it forced them winning the early Iowa caucuses. Hillary Clinton kind of abdicated that. They decided that the caucus was not the place that they were going to win. And they, as Jeff said, they thought, well, we will win these big states, and that'll get us to the number we needed. And that ended up being a faulty strategy, because by Super Tuesday, the lead was so long that you couldn't catch up. I mean, you remember that there was a period where Obama won like 10 straight contests, and it was like a month before Hillary Clinton won one. And the interesting thing was it was the lead that was built up, and also the momentum changed, and the sense of inevitability became to accrue to Obama's favor. And it ended up, Hillary Clinton actually won like 9 of the last 15 contests, and she won a lot of big states, but it wasn't enough. And so that gets at the idea, it takes a certain amount of confidence, and maybe it's because he was an insurgent. He had people around him that were a little, they were certainly connected to the party, but not always in the sense of have done 40 campaigns. And so that was important. Another really important thing that goes with organizing and gets at voters is how they tapped into people around the country. I mean, they really had mastered the technology, and that's the part that I think people will be studying. Campaigns won't be done the same way anymore. They kind of, the whole social networking site concept was integrated into the campaign. They had one of Facebook's co-founders. You go on to myBarackObama.com and you watch how you can dial into all of these events that were happening around the country, and what would literally happen with that, people would set up something. Jane Smith would say, you know what, I think I want to have an event, and get people to come to a little diner. And through that site, next thing you know, there might be like 1,000 people there. They would be overrun, and it was they were able to build things almost kind of organically in places and draw volunteers to their campaign in a way that I think had not really been done before, and it really caught people by surprise. I would go out to places and people would say, they get a cold call from Obama, so we need you to, we're setting up an office here in this place, and we need you to help. What do you need me to do? What do you want to do? And people would come, and they wouldn't even know how they got their name, but they had developed this way of tapping into volunteers and local levels, and almost kind of setting up a separate campaign infrastructure, an affiliated campaign infrastructure. The people running these offices around the country were the people who never run campaign offices. I mean, people who were 20-somethings, had not ever been involved in politics, were literally given people would come in and they had worked as a telemarketer. And this is literally an actual example. A guy that I had run into, he had come in Scranton, Pennsylvania, come in, and he was looking for work. He was out of a job, would come back. He grew up in Scranton. He walked into the office, and there were some other young people who were setting up Obama's office, and he walked in, and they said, well, we're going to do some registering some voters out in this particular housing development. He walked in, and he ended up registering voters with them. He ended up getting a job, and then he was phone bank director, just like that. And that was the phone bank director in Scranton in this place. And that was repeated around the country. So it kind of defined a lot of the conventional wisdom about who you needed to run campaigns. The coalition that he put together, it was, we can remember the times when in the early period, that coalition, people thought, well, there's a lot of young people who are enthusiastic, but will these young people come out and really vote? And so there was a big doubt about that. African Americans, which would seem like a natural coalition for him, a constituency for him, there was doubts about that. He was polling really low at the time. Early on. Even with Hillary Clinton, there was a sense by them that they could get, they would compete for the African American vote and at least get 30%. And by the time South Carolina came, the black vote was off limits. They were getting Ronald Reagan numbers. And you can't get that and compete for the nomination. So I think it was a slow build. Working class white voters, of course, were difficult for him in places, but he was able to win them in places like Virginia and Wisconsin just enough. And so I think now you have a situation where the map has been extended. There's probably opportunities from a coalition-building government in places like North Carolina, New Mexico, Colorado that didn't exist before this election.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's a natural segue into Larry Rasky in terms of commenting on this coalition and on the future of the party. I think a very interesting question were all of these people were, I think, drawn to Barack Obama, and I think they certainly used them and exploited them, not exploited in a negative way, but used all of this enthusiasm that they were getting. But was it unique to him? And I know Larry said to me yesterday that the expectations for this administration are incredibly high, and that he doesn't have supporters, he has followers in the biblical sense, which reminds me of, I was at an event last week, and Mark Shields told a joke about the couple of presidents that were from Illinois, and Barack Obama, of course, wasn't born in Illinois. He was born in a manger. Anyway, tell us what you think about that, Larry.
Well, I think Kevin and Jeff both said a lot of things that I agree with. And certainly Kevin focusing on the underestimation of the president-elect as a candidate, and Jeff on his supporters, and everybody underestimating them, I think, and their size was, I think, sort of tantamount. It really was. Sometimes I'm actually at the end of the campaign and end of the Iowa caucuses, I was sitting there like wondering why we actually thought we could win, and spent the better part of 2 years beating our brains against the wall, our heads against the wall. But I also remember that actually up until the last couple of weeks, and I think Jeff will remember this, we were getting endorsements in Iowa from state representatives, and we were turning out crowds. Joe Biden was turning out crowds of 500 people at events that made us really believe that we could pull off an Iowa surprise. But there was clearly something happening that none of us really understood in terms of the empowerment of an entire new failings of American voters who would never participated before. I will tell one sort of tale out of school. Towards the end of the campaign, a couple of days before Election Day, we were offered, quote unquote, a deal in Iowa by one of the candidates to throw our supporters to that candidate on the second ballot in exchange for a certain number of delegates. And, a number of us sat around, kicking around the math, trying to estimate turnout and whether that number of delegates was sufficient to try and make that deal, and came to the conclusion that it wasn't. On our own, we were going to secure more delegates than what was being offered to us. Well, at the end of the day, when Election Day came in Iowa and the caucuses, people started showing up at the caucuses, our supporters were just overwhelmed by the sheer numbers. And honestly, we didn't get it at the beginning, and I think we finally got it at the end in terms of what was going on. It was actually Kevin's colleague, Shayla Murray, who first really identified it for me. We were sitting watching a bunch of reporters and political operatives. We were sitting watching a football game at the Marriott in Des Moines one night, and we're sort of kicking around this turnout question, and is it going to be 120, which is what it's historically been, or 150 maybe, or whatever. And Shayla just looked at me and she said, "Larry, you just don't get it." She said, this is like the 35-year-old mother of two who has never been involved in politics before. The numbers are just going to be overwhelming. And the reporters who were on the ground with Senator Obama saw it, but the political campaigns were operating more in a conventional sense. So I think what you saw was this huge group of disenfranchised Americans kind of sitting out there waiting for somebody to give voice to their hopes and aspirations, and not all at once, but little by little, Barack Obama became the voice for their hopes and aspirations. And at the end of the day, that was a force that was beyond politics, and to me, in my mind, that's the force that's propelled him to the presidency. So now, but now again, as I said to you yesterday, the expectations for whether or not he can deliver on those hopes and aspirations, I think is a huge challenge, for him, for Senator Biden, and for everybody else who joins this administration.
Well, we want to talk about that, but first, before we do that, we have to sort of attend the Republican wake with Brad.
It's a hangover at this point.
Okay. The Republican governors are sort of at a wake down in Miami. And Tim Pawlenty was on NPR this morning, and I told you about this. He had some very kind of harsh words for his party. He said the Republican idea factory has grown stale. And he talked about Ronald Reagan and said, yes, well, Ronald Reagan was a great guy, but that was a long time ago. So how much, what does this election do to the Republican Party? How much retooling needs to be done?
Well, I think Tim Pawlenty's half right. I think the Republican idea factory has grown stale. I would disagree with him about the Ronald Reagan comment. Our firm did a pre-election swing state survey in 4 swing states. My partner, Wes Anderson, is a pollster, and only 10% of the voters in those 4 swing states said the Republican Party had gotten too conservative. Meanwhile, 70% 77% of the ticket splitters in those states say the Republican Party has gotten away from what it promised in 1994, and we needed the Republican Party of 1994 again. Now, I'm not saying that's the full answer, and if we only stop at that, we're making a big mistake. However, we ended up on Election Day with an 8-point disadvantage on spending, which parties are more likely to control spending, a 9-point disadvantage on which parties likely to cut taxes, a 10-point disadvantage on which parties likely to have a responsible energy program that brings down prices, 10% disadvantage on the economic crisis. Our only significant advantage was on the issue of terror and defense, where we had an 18-point advantage. And so I think to see the fact that we have sort of collapsed upon ourselves on many issues that are essential to us. Republicans aren't going to win any election with an 8 or 9 point disadvantage on taxes and spending. We have to have a 10-point advantage on those two issues to win elections. And so I think that the first answer for Republicans is to sort of go back and be Republicans again, and then we have to sort of look beyond that. As Governor Jindal has said, we can't just say, hey, government-controlled health care is a bad idea. Our health care plan has to be more than one sentence, which says what we're against on health care. That's right. Most Americans are with us on that, but then we have to go a little bit further. And I think that'll be a big test for the Republicans in Congress this time, is if we figure out which issues we need to dare the Democrats to do what they want to do, which issues we need to sort of hug the Democrats and find a middle ground with them on, and in which issues, we need to just make our principled stand to make sure our voters know where we are and let them find their own 218 votes. It's just really 3 categories of things we have to do. I was sort of surprised, Larry, to hear you say reporters were hanging out at your bar and at your hotel. We don't have that in our campaigns.
Actually, there were quite a few Republicans at that bar. Right?
I think on a couple of points to where
they love to play that game about the liberal press.
I take a lot of ribbing in Republican circles for being what I call a recovering reporter. To Kevin's point about the technology, is the map extended? I think that's a pretty open question. I think Democrats would like to think it's extended. I think that's going to large part depend on how the Obama administration governs. And does it govern on the, with its main allegiance to the people who nominated it and the energy and the spirit that nominated him, or on the ticket splitting voters in red states who elected him? They will not be able to serve both those interests. They will have to choose one. Bill Clinton chose one. George Bush chose one and found a path to victory choosing it. Both of them did in the re-elects, and the Obama administration is going to have to pick one of those two paths, and they're very, very different. People also forget that John McCain got more votes than George Bush in North Carolina. North Carolina is probably the one that stings the most for Republicans because you cannot construct a winning presidential coalition for us unless North Carolina is out of play. We sort of demographic changes are making Virginia sort of a permanently in play state. They're probably making Colorado a permanently in play state. I think that those same demographic changes are making Minnesota in play as well. Democrats won't be able to take Minnesota. Remember, Walter Mondale did carry Minnesota, as despite carrying nothing else. Those days are over. Minnesota's not a base Democrat state anymore. Neither will Virginia be a Republican state where you can't play. But we saw in metropolitan North Carolina in particular, John McCain got the same vote as George Bush did in Winston-Salem, and yet his percentage dropped 10 points. He got the same vote as George Bush did in Charlotte, and yet his percentage dropped 12 points. He got the same number of raw votes in Raleigh-Durham, and yet his percentage dropped 9 points. So I think that, and you look at those voters on the issues, those voters in suburban North Carolina and suburban Virginia, those voters are still very much lean Republican voters. And now we're going to have to work hard to get them back. But the Obama administration is going to have to work really hard and be something different than they were in Iowa and New Hampshire if they hope to get them again in 4 years.
Well, I think that's an interesting segue into what happens next. And I think in Congress, which, of course, in order to get legislation passed, you do have to involve Congress. You can't do it on your own. And in the House, a lot of these new members that were elected in Republican districts are much more moderate than the leadership. We have the fiscal conservatives, the blue dogs, and they are, as National Journal called them, they're probably going to be a bit rowdy. They will need to get reelected in 2 years, and they're mindful of that. And so what I'd like to sort of throw it open to the whole panel in terms of how you think, does Obama, exactly the question Brad just posed, does Obama hew to these new voters he attracted and what they want, the people that say get out of Iraq now and do a million things that cost a lot of money, or does he, is he mindful of the moderates in his coalition?
Linda, there's going to be 70 to 75 Democrats in the House of Representatives who sit in districts George W. Bush carried. That is a big chunk of the Democratic caucus for the first time. We like to joke that blue dogs are liberals who don't want business to spend money against them, and they've sort of been a minor factor in the Democratic
the blue
caucus.
dogs are 20% of the caucus.
Right, but a third will be from districts George Bush carried, or nearly a third, 30%. That's something that the leadership will have to deal with, sort of jam them into line and force those guys to fend for themselves in 2 years.
So what does everybody else think about that? You guys have both covered Congress.
I think that is the central question here, and I would look for the first 2 years of an Obama administration and to be focused very much on the midterms. They're already sort of having quiet conversations about the midterms of 2010. So the opening phase of his administration will be very much, I think, focused on sort of attending to the needs of a lot of those moderates, the Heath Schulers, the number of others. And perhaps the second 2 years of the term will be more of a, making sure the base is in line. But it would be hard for me to imagine that in the presidential reelect 4 years from now, that if Indiana is still in play, or perhaps North Carolina is still in play, the map, my guess is, will look different because it's going to be a very hard first term for a president-elect, I guess then President Obama. But I think one of the things to watch is sort of how they deal with the Hill, and the choice of Rahm Emanuel in the Chief of Staff's position, I think, is an interesting one, because everyone assumed initially that he would be the Obama administration sort of person on the Hill, like he would be the person who would keep Speaker Pelosi sort of more in the middle and other things. But since he's not there, who fills that vacuum? One other thing I think to watch, Senator Harry Reid is up for re-election in 2010. Nevada has changed somewhat as well, but he will probably be challenged there. The Senate is going to be a very moderating force, I think, for a lot of this. So I think it's one of the things that the Obama folks haven't yet figured out, but he has some political capital. I think he has a lot of political capital, and we'll see if his leadership abilities allow him to sort of convince some of those followers, as Larry describes them, to sort of hold on and to hang with him. And I think it probably will for a while, but people will be restless and probably impatient by the middle of next year. So it's one of his biggest challenges.
Just to play off of that, I think that gets back to the expectations that Larry raised. I think there are expectations everywhere, and I think managing those expectations, there'll be expectations, of course, from the coalition that he built out in the country, which can either be utilized as a force, usually to get things done, as Reagan did, or it can be, you can get overwhelmed by them. But it'll be expectations in Congress, and I think, as Clinton found out when he had every realm of government at his disposal, it was very difficult to manage that. And I think that'll be one of his challenges. Obama has certainly made kind of the idea of a new politics and bipartisanship. He's made that kind of a core theme, and people are going to be looking to see how he implements that. And meanwhile, Democrats, after 8 years of George Bush, and many of them want to say this is our chance. We have a mandate. There's some things we should be able to get done now that we haven't gotten done, and there'll be pressure for him. I thought that what Brad said was interesting about the Republicans wanting to return to the party of '94. And Gingrich built that. He had been building that for years and years back when Jim Wright was, a speaker, and he got it to a point where it really, they were able to overtake the Democrats, and that's an interesting model. I would be interested to see how does the opposition carry itself in this time. How aggressive will they be of taking the fight and trying to kind of do everything to kind of, gum up the engines of whatever Obama's building, or will they want to try to show the public that they have a new party and that they, are going to be kind of in the moment of these times? Because I do think there is a sense that there's kind of a transformation of the country going on. The only thing I disagree a little bit about, North Carolina, I think Brad is right about North Carolina stinging the most. But I think North Carolina is more in the mode of Virginia. I think North Carolina is one of those states where the demographics, you've seen them changing, blacks coming back, migrating back to the South, everything that's happened in the Research Triangle, Latino and Asian immigrants. I think you see, I think it's something like 10% of people in the state now, English is a second language. I think you're seeing things that quietly have been happening, that it's not, it's not the party of Jesse Helms that people know and think of as this conservative red state. And I think that's happening in a lot of other places. And how that grows through an Obama presidency will be interesting to see. How that grows politically will be an interesting thing to watch.
Let's talk a little bit about so obviously as a result of this election there is the desire for change. The question is there the capacity for change? How much change is possible? There was a hotline poll just very recently, and 66% of those polled think Barack Obama can bring real change to Washington, including a third of Republicans. So what does that mean? What would constitute real change? Yes, we can. Yes, we can what?
Well, let me just...
Go ahead.
I was walking into this building today, and I was actually thinking to myself that the measure of success for the Obama administration will be judged in how many buildings are named after Barack Obama 50 years from now. No, I really, in a way, though, I'm not really kidding. I think that this is a transformational moment in time if this administration plays it as such. I think if they succumb to conventional wisdom and try and triangulate their way through the midterm elections, that expectations will steadily diminish. People will get by. They will accomplish some of the things. I was talking to one member of Congress the other day who said, I'm talking about health care, and they said, well, we remember the Clinton, era, and we're not going to make those mistakes again. I don't think Congress will lead. They will look to President Obama to lead. And I think it will be the boldness of his vision that dictates just how far we can go and how much we can get done. And I think if they succumb to, diminish expectations, if they succumb to the fears that people have over the midterm elections, and by the way, I don't think they will. I think that this crowd is tough, disciplined, believes in what they're doing, and they do have, I think, two big challenges right now, which is, one, to be able to clearly articulate the guiding principles of their government. What is an Obama administration going to be? Similar to the way Reagan, articulated his agenda, then his, conservative agenda of limited government and, tough defense and sort of the return to traditional, family values, however they define it, whether it is repairing the breach of faith between government and the people or restoring the middle class. They need some big overarching principles so that when people get to their desk every day, they know what their job is, unlike what happened with Jimmy Carter and I would dare say Bill Clinton, where it was really, it was not a philosophical revolution. It was just a bunch of political activity that really never really, in my view, hung together.
Larry, I hope you're right. From our perspective, I hope that the Obama administration will be ideologically pure, and I think that it's still a center-right country, and if we get a center-right Obama presidency, he will be transformational. If we get a left-center or left-center Obama administration, this will be the same thing will happen with Jimmy Carter and with Bill Clinton, and that will be which are the last two times Democrats controlled both chambers and the presidency, both short-lived. I think, all of us in the wake of a victory tend to overstate a little bit what we've accomplished. We want an axiom in politics: we always learn too much from victory and too little from defeat. And I remember a few years back when we were talking about a permanent governing majority, a phrase that's really ringing in all our ears right now. And I think Karl Rove coined that phrase, and it sure doesn't feel like one right now. It didn't feel very permanent anyway. And so I think that Democrats sort of get lost in their own magic right now at their own peril. The magic of Barack Obama's campaign, as someone who dial tested more speeches of his than I care to even remember right now, the magic was when he was talking about something that was very different from Democrat Party that people associate it with, the things that people associate the Democrat brand. I mean, his post-partisan rhetoric was the real magic of his campaign. It was the thing that we were emulating in other campaigns for both parties down ticket. Republicans' campaigns were, Democrat campaigns were, and I think that certainly the first few steps, with Rahm Emanuel, that doesn't look very post-partisan to me. I've heard names of Phil Scialero going to be his congressional affairs guy, one of the most partisan guys in Washington. And so I actually, as a Republican, and someone who's pretty philosophical, I hope you're right. I hope we do get a pure, undiluted liberal presidency, and if for the things that work, great for America. But I would like to see in stark relief sort of two philosophical choices.
I don't think I promoted the idea of a pure, unadulterated liberal presidency. I do think there needs to be a pure, unadulterated Barack Obama presidency, and what that means.
Well, the question, though, is what is that?
Right, I agree. But he has to articulate that.
He does.
And the question also is how to pay for it. The deficit
Really?
Next year could be...
Can't we just do what like Reagan did and sell bonds to Japan?
Well, we've kind of gotten to the end
they're
of
out of
that.
money.
No one will buy our credit anymore.
Japanese are not out of money. Trust me.
The deficit next year could be $1 trillion. The debt will be $10 trillion. I think there's the fiscal crisis, and then there's everything else. And the question is, what do we do with this?
Well, I think that's where the expectations and sort of reining these things in begins. I mean, there's a long list. I mean, I filled up page after page after page in my notebooks and on my laptop of what they promised, of what Mr. Obama promised during the campaign, as well as, Joe Biden and everyone else. Of course, all those things aren't going to happen. At some point, they're going to have to articulate that and say that all those things aren't going to happen. And I think he gets a bit of a pass in some respects, at least initially, by not bringing all that change at once, because he simply can't afford it. I mean, you heard at the end of the campaign in the last, I don't know, 3-4 weeks maybe, sort of maybe one more line in every speech about how Americans will have to tighten their belts, how this is going to be difficult. Even before he won, Senator Obama was trying to rein in, I think, some of these expectations for what happens afterward. But he's inheriting a big problem, and they said that all these programs would be paid for by the expenditures that were going into the Iraq War. Well, the condition on the ground in Afghanistan is worsening, and so all those expenditures are not going to end. So we'll see if they do health care, in the first few months or the first half of the year. I think that will be a good sign or a good barometer of things like how much they can actually get done in the first year. But, I asked Mr. Obama a question at his first press conference last week if he is still planning on implementing the tax increases essentially for higher income Americans in 2009, and he didn't. It sounded like he maybe backed away from it, but probably not. So, higher taxes are at hand for some Americans. His big tax cut is at hand for others. He says 95% of Americans. We'll see, but I mean, there's no question that the fiscal situation is going to impede and impact his whole presidency. But Rahm Emanuel also had a line I thought was interesting. He said it's their burden to seize on this moment of economic downturn and make something from this. So from a crisis situation, I think they can perhaps get something from this because people realize it's a crisis. And, in 76, 78, the Carter administration did not take advantage of the crisis in terms of using that to their advantage. So I think that's one thing that you'll hear a lot is how they're going to try and use this crisis to get, to leverage goodwill and good work on the Hill. But, he's chained. There's no question in terms of what they can do.
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that, Obama was pressed on toward the end of the campaign, well, both candidates were, and neither had really a good answer. And Obama, of course, he's the president, didn't ever seem to really deal with what are you going to ask Americans to sacrifice. And that was a question. It wasn't just a journalistic question. It was a question that people were asking out in the country. I mean, and I remember sitting watching one of the last debates in a home with a family, and they were saying, I wish he would say, the woman, they were saying, I wish he would say. And she was kind of on the fence, wavering at the time about who she was going to vote for. She said, I want to vote for Obama. I wish he would just say, tell us what we need to really do in these times to sacrifice. Tell us we have to do something other than, turn off the lights and not let as much, run as much electricity. And I think that he probably has a moment because of who he is, his leadership, and the things that Larry has mentioned about this transformational moment to really ask people to sacrifice and things and prepare people for that. And I think that's a larger question for the country. Meanwhile, on the Hill you have, Nancy Pelosi asking Barney Frank's committee to start working on bailing out the auto industry. So these are kind of things that are happening. On one hand, okay, so here's another industry that's getting bailed out, and how many more need to get bailed out, and how many more, where does it stop? And then out in the country, you have the situation of people, in one sense, wondering, feeling a certain instability, in another sense, being compelled and drawn to this figure who does seem like a different, singular leadership figure that we haven't had in a while. So I think that's, it's a strange kind of juxtaposition.
I think you're onto something, Kevin, in that I think that a lot of Republicans believe the seminal moment of this administration was when the American people weren't asked to sacrifice. When the president's political capital was at its zenith following 9/11 at the beginning of the war, if the president had told Americans this is going to be hard, this is not going to be easy, we're not going to have our mission accomplished in a short amount of time, this will cost us money, it will cost us lives, and we have to dig in and do this. A lot of us believe that was where things started to go wrong, is when we didn't ask America to sacrifice up at the very front when our political capital was at its highest point. And I think it's very tempting, having all of us having been there when your political capital is at its peak and at a variety of levels. It's very tempting to not do that because you're immediately taking some chips to the window and handing them in when you do that. And so I think that's a big choice for this administration, and they'll have to do it to their own. You have to do it to your own base first, because those are the people with whom you have the most credibility to ask them to sacrifice. And I think that's for a candidate who didn't run down the center of his own nominating process. That's an even more difficult choice for him to make. But no one perhaps has had the political capital he has to do that. He's not coming in as a president with a razor-thin margin. He's not coming in as a president with problems in his own base. A McCain presidency would have been severely hampered in his first 4 years by problems in his own base had he won. He would have faced a whole different set of challenges than Barack Obama does. So I think that, is he willing to say, here's what you have to sacrifice, starting with his own most ardent supporters? I think that's a big question.
Now, the one thing I want to say is, obviously, we're all sort of on pins and needles to try and figure out, are they going to pull the energy plan back? Are they going to pull health care back? Are they going to go ahead with the tax cut? And the reason is that he has to get off to a fast start. He needs some success to keep his supporters energized. He needs to make sure that, he has Congress, leaning his way, looking to him for leadership. So what he chooses to do, and I totally agree with this sense of shared sacrifice, that has to be part of the opening message and in a real sense deliver. I'm hoping that one of the things that's, not being talked about is, despite the problems in Afghanistan, that they can make the drawdown in Iraq, the end to the Iraq war, the promise that they made, and that becomes the first promise that they deliver on, and that buys them a lot of goodwill and a lot of good faith with their supporters.
In thinking about this idea of sacrifice, and how do you ask the American people to sacrifice, and what do you ask the American people to sacrifice? We know that Barack Obama has no problem communicating, that this is obviously his greatest strength, and I know there's been some talk about his trying, a digital version of the fireside chat and communicating with the American people in a new way. Even though I would like you guys to weigh in on this, I think you could count among his followers some of the news media. He certainly did not lack for favorable, almost adoring coverage throughout a lot of the campaign. So, but somehow I think
none of his primary opponents felt that way.
But he still wants to connect directly to the American people without that filter. So, how do you all think that would be the best way to do that?
Well, I think one of his challenges is people were engaged at the highest level ever, perhaps, in terms of what was happening in a presidential campaign. I heard on the radio this morning that there was a Pew poll out that, almost everyone is sort of tired of politics, except like 17% of Americans still want more or something, whatever the number is. So I think his audience is not as eager or as willing to be checking his homepage or whatever, but I think they definitely will build on some of the things that they used in terms of the direct communication. And there has been a lot of talk, obviously, about how favorable the media was to them, et cetera. We can have that discussion at a different time, I guess, but there's no question that they didn't necessarily view it like that, and they tried at every turn to bypass the media. He gave fewer interviews with reporters than probably any other presidential candidate.
And wasn't punished for it.
Reporters. Right, because it looks, I think his definition of being transparent and open and the administration's view of being transparent and open is by communicating directly. Well, like, we're sending you this email message, we're sending you this video message, so it looks like it's coming right from him. But I don't think that's going to work quite as well in the White House, because people expect their president to be questioned. There is a lot more dissent from the Hill and other things. So I think he's going to have to do a lot more of a salesman's pitch in terms of asking people to sacrifice, but also in terms of selling his program and things. So, and he's capable of doing that. I mean, he's someone who isn't, he wasn't shielded from reporters and shielded from tough questions at events because he can't handle it. It was sort of a message discipline thing, obviously. So I think you'll see a more open White House, at least in the beginning, because he has to be. He has to sort of sell this, the challenges ahead. But I could be wrong.
We're carrying signs and now have nobody to proselytize, and how to, and it kind of goes to me to this whole issue, this whole question of, can they really make participatory democracy work? There was this sense of empowerment that all these folks out there had about what an Obama presidency would bring. It allowed them, the great thing about the Obama campaign was it allowed you to make of it what you wanted to make of it, and it made it very easy for you to participate. Now that that's done, what do you have these folks participate in? Transparency is great, but I don't think that 35-year-old mother of two is getting invited to sit in the meetings with Axelrod and Plug next week. So how does she feel like she's in the game? What are they going to offer up to allow folks to feel invested in this administration and how they do it? There are some, and it's got to be something other than change your light bulbs, right? So, there are vast problems that could lend themselves to some very interesting mass-marketed solutions around the environment, around global affairs, and I'm hoping that they're thinking large, with that kind of imagination, so that they can empower people that, look, my son and all his friends who were, knocking on doors up in New Hampshire, they want to, there's something out there now to be harnessed and to be used, frankly, as a counterweight to the resistance to some of the political realities and economic realities that, he's necessarily going to face.
They utilized during the campaign their website to great effect, and on a couple of legislative issues you saw kind of a scrum happening online with people letting him know how they felt about something, and then there being response. I mean, you wonder if they can carry that to government. The government is such a massive, such a massive infrastructure, but whether or not you'll see the president blogging, in a way that feels like people are interacting with him. I mean, I think they have, or at least are trying to build the technological, the means to do things like that. But I mean, even Jeff knows better than me. I mean, just the transition website may be in danger of crashing. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with technology, and they could then make people feel frustrated because they can't get through. It's just like when they did the text message and they sent out the announcement to Biden. Everybody was really anxious to learn who's the VP going to be, and then people had like 3-hour delays before they got the message, and it was already on CNN. So then there was a disappointment of that. They certainly have amassed the kind of information that no campaign has ever amassed in terms of knowing who their voters are in a very specific way. They may have maybe 10 million cell numbers. I don't know what that, but they have been able to. they have the means to communicate with the people that supported them in a way that other campaigns have not had, and that it'll be interesting to see how does that become a source of empowerment for people out there or a source of frustration. We don't know.
I think the answer to this question is it's out of Barack Obama's hands.
That's right.
It's in the hands of the people whose cell numbers he has. You can't unplug folks, and they will participate. He may regret their participation at times. It's all he may be able to use it as a powerful tool, but that's largely going to be in the hands of all those folks. You can direct people toward a vote yes. You can't direct them toward be with us on these 50 legislative matters in Congress. I think that it was very easy to direct that. It's an amazing feat what they built, and everyone should who steps back and looks at it, it was really a marvel. Now, the winners always are at the front of technology. I mean, 4 years ago we were talking about micro-targeting and the 72-hour task force that Republicans did, and so you don't win in American politics unless you master something new, and so I think that, but yet. Still, they did make a quantum leap in campaign technology, but that group of people is now motivated, is now plugged in, and they're going to either be disappointed or they're going to be energized. And I don't think they will be easily directed.
If I can,
Before you say something, let me just say we'd like to open it to questions. So if people can be thinking about questions, and I don't know, do they need to be mic'd, or would you like to? Are you going to? So if you'd like to ask a question, just stand up and we'll find you, and but go ahead.
Well, the
Larry.
one thing I do want to say is, I mean, I'm a Boston guy, and we have kind of a laboratory example in Massachusetts of how that kind of support can be squandered. Okay, Deval Patrick, who came to office, same consultant and same. Very much the same type of supporters, the same hopeful, voice for change.
Together we can.
Came in as governor with this huge sense of momentum behind him, and in a year, all of those young people who had, were so ardently behind him, completely, I'd go so far as to say turned off, but got very skeptical because the realities of government caught up with him, and his big proposal turned out to be, casino gambling to pull Massachusetts out of its economic mess, and there was this kind of cry that went up among, his folks about, this is not what I bought. This is not why we came to this party. And he's trying to get it back right now. And frankly, he's done a much better job in his second year in office, getting himself re-energized and getting his administration back on track. But, Massachusetts is a smaller problem, and we have no Republican Party to speak of. So, he can kind of run his own show. President-elect Obama will not be given that kind of a grace period. He needs to, as I said, he needs to find some way to energize his, supporters and take advantage of this moment, the first year.
So, do we have questions? If you go ahead, do you? Oh, whatever. If you would like to ask.
Can I ask Brad a question? How do you rebuild the Republican Party? There still are members of the party in Congress who are troubled about immigration. And if you look at the Hispanic vote, clearly Hispanics were listening and understood as Republicans talked about immigration. How do you do that? Mitt Romney wasn't acceptable because he was a Mormon, and you have the religious base. How do you get all of this together and have a party that is articulating who it is and what it is in time for the
I think the first thing for us is to not get distracted by rabbits. We have to go back to fundamentally who we are and fundamentally where America agrees with us. And that's the luxury of being in the minority, is you don't have to deal with every single issue. You don't have to have, that was one of the things we never quite mastered as a governing majority, is you have to deal with everything when you run the show. You have to solve the immigration problem, where you're torn between, sort of the business supporters on one side and your grassroots supporters on the other side. As a minority party, we can focus on things that really matter, and that voters trust us most on, or have historically trusted us most on, like taxes. Barack Obama has really convinced a lot of folks that he's going to be a pretty big tax cutter. In the last week of the campaign, he ran more ads on tax cuts than any other subject. And it was a very important part of his victory to get that advantage on taxes. Well, we need to take him up on that. And I have a feeling that there's a place we can go in the next year that will regain our advantage on taxes in a big way. In a down economy, that's going to matter a lot. We need to have a middle-class tax cut that is 3 times bigger than anyone that he'll accept. And we need to spend a whole year talking about it. And we need to sort of not get sucked into the, this is all about capital gains, or this is all about the renewing the old Bush tax cuts. We need to really take him up on it. You all remember that ad with the calculator? It said, go to taxcut.org. He has a better tax cut than you. Okay, well, let's prove that. Let's see how committed he is to that. Let's see if he can get 218 Democrat votes in the House for a drastic, radical middle-class tax cut. I think that's the sort of picking the fights in the right spots is the right place for us. I think being bolder on entitlements than he will be is important for us. There are a lot of independents who really get the fact that we're, the Medicare system and the Social Security system are in serious trouble. Certainly President Bush's solution to that was not met with enough support. A lot of us believe, Republicans in the Congress bailed out on him too quickly on that. And so we got all the problems and none of the good of it. Maybe it wasn't the right exact solution to begin with. Maybe it wasn't bold enough to begin with. But I think as a minority party, we can do a lot to talk about entitlements, about spending, about taxes. And I think we have a chance to turn a new page on things like health care. I think, you're not talking to swing voters if you're not talking about health care. And we have forgotten that way too many times. And I think that the patented liberal answer and the patented conservative answer on health care both failed. And if there ever was an issue that the only solution and the only one voters will accept is in the middle, it is on health care. And I think that this administration is more than likely going to head down, it's sort of the left path. And if we only go down the right path, we will make a huge, huge mistake. I think that you saw that this year in a down economy. Health care became more important. It always does. Education always diminishes importance in a down economy. Health care always ascends in importance. That's going to be the case for the next couple of years. And if we don't take a proactive role on health care and sort of prove some new ideas that will work, and I think that starts with our governors, frankly, and not with our House caucus or our Senate caucus. I think that the burden is on Republican governors to do what they did with welfare in the 90s and take a social bread and butter issue and prove the Republican idea works better than the Democratic idea.
So the Republicans are willing to compromise on health care, so that's good to hear.
Well, I don't know that. The question is whether the Democrats are going to be willing to compromise, too. Both parties, frankly, have not reached out to each other on that issue, on that subject. I mean, it's very hard to find an example where Republicans and Democrats have been willing to work for something in between their two dogmas on health care.
Massachusetts.
There you have it. There is one. That's right.
So if I can give a shout out to my students also who are here from the Boston University Washington Center, we welcome your questions as well. Go ahead.
Would anyone know how many Democratic congressmen and senators were elected by margins in their districts and states exceeding Barack Obama's? How many were elected by essentially the same margin, and how many were elected by a smaller margin, and how this would impact how well the president will get along with and motivate Congress?
You're talking about Democratic House members. Do you know, Brad?
I don't know exact numbers. I can tell you that from a margin perspective, the drop-off was historic this year. People walking in, voting for president, and walking out of the booth. So that a real question a lot of Democrats, I think, on the Hill are going to have is, how much of your movement is my movement, because so many people did walk in and walk out and vote. By and large, that number is going to be pretty large. His margin over McCain was much bigger in most of these swing districts than the Democrat who won those swing districts. But again, the problem is there are 75 Democrats in Congress from basically Republican districts. There are probably now that we're hopefully nearing the bottom, probably 10 Republicans in districts carried by John Kerry or Al Gore, 10 to 15. So Democrats are sort of sitting in hostile territory a little bit more than Republicans are.
We have one of my students has a question in the back.
I have a question. Do you think? What do you think about the prospects of Sarah Palin being a unifying Republican leader, or even the prospects of her becoming an electoral ticket for 2012?
I thought we could get through
It's just
this
all over
without
the news,
mentioning
so.
Sarah Palin. There's sort of a Sarah Palin addiction, isn't there? The media certainly has one.
Well, I mean, I think the media is obviously scheduling these interviews, but she's available. So, I mean, I think
All of a sudden, she's available.
I don't think that was a joke.
I think if you look at her travel schedule in the final hours of the campaign, I thought it was sort of interesting. She went to the eastern side of Iowa, the northeastern side of Iowa, to a Dubuque County, Iowa. It's normally a Democratic place, but a conservative Democratic place. She could have gone any place. The McCain campaign obviously knew they were losing Iowa at that point.
I'm not sure they did.
What's that?
I'm not sure they did.
Well, they should have, because it was obvious early on, I think. I mean, she was obviously going there because of the, in that part of Iowa, obviously Joe Biden was strong, but the abortion issue is a major one. But in any case, she went to Iowa a lot more times than John McCain did in the final week or so. Was that a sign that she wants to play 4 years from now? Who knows? But I think it's up to her sort of to see how much she will be will play a role in this. But I think the conservative base of the party is still very much enchanted by her, and I think she has a chance to sort of remake herself a little bit. So I don't think we've heard the end of Sarah Palin at all. I think, what if she ends up being a senator from Alaska? That's certainly a possibility. I think she has plenty of time to remake herself, and I hope she does. It's a great story.
It is a great story, and obviously the media loves it. Brad, you having worked for Mitt Romney, who I'm sure is thinking about 4 years from now, you also, I know, are a fan of Sarah Palin's. So what do you think?
Well, I think it's one thing that's very unseemly right now is Republicans who are standing in line to be background sources on hit pieces on Sarah Palin. The fact is she drew 15,000 people in Jefferson City, Missouri, a swing state McCain did carry, I think, 48 hours before the election. I'm not sure who else on John McCain's list would have drawn 15,000 people to Jefferson City, Missouri 48 hours out. And the Republican National Committee shattered fundraising records without the $50 million independent expenditure that we did advertising-wise. Senator McCain would have been at a severe advertising deficit. She's responsible for raising a good bit of that money, the enthusiasm she generated. In mid-September, sort of 2 weeks after her pick, sort of a little bit after the glow had worn off, McCain was down 2 in Pennsylvania and ahead 4 in Ohio. So I'm not sure anyone on that list would have generated the kind of enthusiasm to sort of bump him into that position. We won't ever know. And so I think that sort of the things she brought to the ticket are being way undersold right now. I think as far as what her future is, successful Republican governors who are popular in their states and are innovative on policy always have a future. Our best candidates have always been those kind of governors, and I think that 4 years is a long time. 8 years is a long time. She's a very young governor. There are many elections in her future. There are potential Senate races in her future. So I don't know that you can write the whole book on Sarah Palin yet. I can tell you, I was in a focus group of undecided women in North Carolina about 3 weeks out, and she was still among that group the most popular of the 4 people on the ticket. This is well after Katie Couric, well after Charlie Gibson, and so, certainly you can find plenty of poll data that will show, was she a drag on John McCain in this state, or was she a drag? And people are all rushing that data to the forefront right now. But I think people, we're hearing only one side of the story. I mean, she brought a tremendous amount of enthusiasm to the base. She was also true to the truest John McCain brand, and that shouldn't be understated. I think that's the new way to pick vice presidents. Bill Clinton did it the first time, is you pick someone who completely echoes your brand. And I think the best parts of the John McCain brand, she was true to it. And other candidates that he considered were not necessarily true to that. So I think that, sure, it's the easy job, given if you just do a nexus search, is to pick on Sarah Palin, but no one, the value she brought the ticket is being way undersold.
Do we have a question right up front. She'll get you a mic.
Thank you. There's a talk of a White House office on urban policy. Would any of you like to comment on how you see that office in relation to the other cabinet positions and other agencies? Do you see it as helpful, and what do you see as the pros and the cons of that office?
Well, I actually happen to be in, it's something that Obama mentioned. I don't know. I'm sure he's mentioned it elsewhere. I know he mentioned it at before an organization of black columnists called the Trotter Group. They met with him back in, I think, in last year in Nevada. And he mentioned that was something he wanted to do. I believe he's talked about it when he went to the mayor's conference a few weeks ago. In trying to, mayors, of course, have always been feeling like they get the short end of the stick, from the federal government. They're always dealing with these intractable problems and not having the kind of tax base and, having, too much poor, Reggie, the things that mayors deal with. And I think this was designed, I was in a session with a group of reporters just the other day when Valerie Jarrett, who's his co-chairman, one of the co-chairmen of his transition team, said that was something that was on course to have a White House chief of urban policy that would kind of act as a coordinator of all of the various efforts for urban America that exist in all these agencies. It would kind of harness this and would be kind of a conduit. How that plays out, in terms of what the position, I think, when it comes to these kind of things, it's always a matter of what is the stature of any particular office or any particular individual. I think the idea that you would have somebody inside the White House who would be in charge of urban policy, and that is certainly something that is a little bit different. But I don't know what the structure of it. Maybe Jeff knows more. He's closer to the White House.
I don't. I think it's still being planned, but I would definitely look for something like that. There's no question. He's closer to big city issues and big city problems than any president, probably in recent memory.
He's
maybe
the last since JFK,
right?
To sort of come from the city.
Right.
I have no idea as to whether this is going to happen, but I will tell you, I think that the nation's mayors are going to find they have some unusual allies, which in the nation's bankers, a few of whom I've talked to, and who truly believe that the decline of the American city is one of the core problems to this declining economy, and they're petrified that if real estate values continue to decay for commercial real estate in some of the bigger cities, then it's going to lead to a whole set of new problems, and it may be one place to begin the recovery is by pumping money into cities and making sure, that the urban economy stays strong.
I think we have time for 2 more questions. Joey has a question.
A brief question. Where do you think the president-elect's going to go with his cabinet? Is he going to be appointing Republicans to a lot of senior important positions like Dick Lugar at State and Bob Gates at Defense, or is he going to be take it more of a liberal way?
I mean, I think you will definitely see more than just nominal or token Republicans in his cabinet. If it's going to be Senator Lugar or Senator Hagel, who knows? But I think, and there'll be some choices that probably will be people we're not thinking of from the business sector, some folks who are out of the box. So I think he definitely will have more than just sort of one Republican in his cabinet. Who they're going to be, we'll find out. Bob Gates is a possibility. We've heard that he may have turned it down. I mean, perhaps he hasn't been asked. Who knows? But I think 2 months from now, we'll see a pretty diverse cabinet in every respect, politically, racially, along gender lines, et cetera.
You care to break any news here, Larry, about who's going to be in the cabinet?
I plead the fifth.
Secretary Rasky.
Yeah. There's nothing I can say that won't be held against me by somebody. I don't know, and I'm glad I don't.
Are we okay?
I just wondered if you could comment on the decidedly tricky international front, something that hasn't been discussed at all in this. I'd really love to hear what you guys have to say about what he's facing.
That's a great question, and you're right. It is something we had not discussed, and sort of second to the economy. Probably, Iraq, obviously, that was discussed a lot in the campaign, but Afghanistan, Pakistan, really big challenges coming up.
Well, if you want. I mean, obviously, I spent a lot of time with Senator Biden talking about these issues and listening to him talk about them over the last 4 years. He believes that none of the problems that we have as a nation can be solved without a global solution, and at least all of the big ones. And so, I think he views one of the first jobs as restoring American credibility abroad, which is at an all-time low. I think that's going to be interesting to see how they go about doing it. Obviously, just the mere fact of President-elect Obama's, election is in and of itself, a major statement that everybody's going to key off. But how they communicate, what kind of, and obviously there is this sort of tension between, wanting to demonstrate strength and the need for diplomacy and a new way of communication. We've got to pull back. There's billions of dollars being spent out there in various ways to spread the Bush doctrine that has to be unwound. So we've got to get a handle on, what they're doing out there now, but these guys know that, whether it's the environment or energy policy or this economic mess we're in, that these are global problems, and I think you'll see a lot of attention to that early.
So you would have been able to answer the question about what is the Bush doctrine, huh?
I don't think there's no issue where that schism I talked about earlier between the people who nominated Barack Obama and the people who elected him. There's no issue where that schism is wider than on foreign affairs. We saw in every study of swing voters we could find in any state, swing voters trusted John McCain a lot more on defense issues, foreign affairs, diplomacy even, than they trusted Barack Obama. I think a lot of Americans have severe hesitations about how he will handle foreign affairs. Will he be too much of a dove? Does he have the experience to deal with it? And I think that was reflected in why Senator Biden was chosen. But I think that the issue of campaigning and governing is probably trickiest for him in this sector and in this area.
Well, I think we probably have to wrap up, but I want to give each panelist a chance. If you have, a quick minute or 30 seconds of anything you'd like to say to sort of wrap up in terms of what to look for in the next month, 2, 6. Kevin?
I think I've pretty much said everything I want to say. I mean, I think we've covered it. I mean, I think it's just recapping. I mean, I think that it is an exciting time because there's so much possibility in lots of different ways. Certainly from a journalist standpoint, I mean, it's just kind of like you're watching almost, if you were, a rebirth of a country in a sense, in a sense that you don't really know what is going to happen with that. It can go in a lot of different directions, but you see people kind of engaged in government in a way, at least the possibility of government in a way that you hadn't seen in a little while.
I'm on to foreign affairs on one, just for 1 second in closing. It seems like a long time ago, but at the end of July, Senator Obama went on sort of an unprecedented foreign policy or a world leaders tour through the campaign. And in the short term, as the trip was going on, it looked like it was a political success. Once he got back to the U.S., he found out that it perhaps wasn't, but I think long term for him, that was a sign of his interest and his engagement in the world. And he certainly has a lot of goodwill. There's no question that he has a lot of goodwill. So I think on the foreign front, he will try and use that as well, because it won't last. It won't last forever. So I think his first foreign trip, whenever that is, will be an interesting one to watch. And since he said he would talk to foreign leaders, his phone, I'm sure, will be ringing off the hook. We'll see how many he answers.
God, I don't know what to say. I am overwhelmed by the moment. I can't even begin. I was standing. I actually saw just a little bit of credit. I saw the first person I saw after the networks called the race for Senator Obama was Deval Patrick, and his knees buckled as we wrapped our arms around each other. There is this, Rachel Maddow called it last night, rampant optimism in the country for what this administration can bring. Obviously, the challenges are daunting, but at least, I for one am just rooting for these guys, and so I hope that as I look at all the young people here today, I think back on my 40 years of my relationship with the presidency, beginning with getting our asses kicked by Richard Nixon a couple of times, and I think how different it is for my son and these guys, and what kind of, to Kevin's point, what kind of transformational moment this could be in terms of the relationship for American citizens with the presidency and what it could mean over the next couple of decades. This is a remarkable moment.
Well, I would just say that, all of us who are in this business spend a whole lot of time beating our heads against cinder block walls trying to figure out how you get Americans to pay attention to politics. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or in a journalist, we're all junkies and we're all bought in, and from down to our soul. It's not just a job. You couldn't possibly work these hours or stay in these crappy hotels if it was. So I think it is a very exciting moment, even if you're on the losing end of this, for the fact that more Americans are engaged right now than they ever have been. I mean, how many times have we sat and beat up copy trying to figure out, will they pay attention to this and care? And they do right now. Everything you do, at least in this presidential campaign, it was a lot harder underneath the presidential campaign, but everything in this presidential campaign was noticed fairly immediately by a large number of Americans, and people had opinions far earlier in the process. They detailed opinions about it. They thought about it. They talked to their neighbors about it. They talked to their coworkers about it. They argued about it. And all of us who communicate for a living, that's what we try to get. We try to get folks to that point. So I think from that perspective alone, it's a pretty exciting time to be to do what we do. And if you care a lot about American democracy, that's a pretty exciting time. And I certainly hope they stay engaged and we can win them over the next 2 years, and that we won't be beating our head against the wall in 2 years trying to say, how do we get them to pay attention again? So I guess I would close with that. The country has a lot of really big challenges, and we Americans are more engaged in it, so we ought to all sort of celebrate that.
Well, I think that's a really nice note to end on. Brad Todd, Larry Rasky, Jeff Zeleny, Kevin Meredith, thank you very, very much. I think it was a great panel. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank the Wilson Center. Thanks so much.
you.